Hello, welcome back to the Practitioner's Workshop. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I want to talk to you a little bit about the philosopher's Mercury. The philosophers like to use words that had multiple meanings, using the most apparent meaning as the cover for the actual meaning, which was the word second understanding. And then it seems like they're talking about one thing, but when they're actually talking about something else altogether. Mercury is one that they chose specifically for this because the Arabic word that it comes from had two meanings. It meant either mercury, the metal, or it meant essence, as in the essence of a thing. And so whenever the philosophers are talking about the essence of a thing, they call that the mercury. And because they're operating on different products and each one has its own essence, and so there's multiple mercuries. And then there's also the essences, the three essences: fire, air, water, that are also called mercury. The essence of fire is called primitive mercury, and the essence of water is called first mercury, or the Holy Grail. The essence of air is golden colored, and it's called second mercury. What they're doing is they're taking essences from different things, and it's really only two mineral bodies that the essences are extracted from, and they extract the mercury from those essences. And some essences have a fire is their essence, and some essences have water or air. And the primitive mercury is the first one, and it's represented by the caduceus with only one snake on the staff. And Flamel has a good picture where it's like a T-shaped cross with a snake wrapped around it in kind of a question mark shape. And that is the primitive mercury, and it's the element of fire. The element of fire comes from the Black Mother, which is the first form of the mother, and also in a circular fashion, the Virgin becomes the mother. And so you have the mother gives birth to the Virgin, and then the Virgin gives birth to the mother, and then the mother gives birth to the Virgin again. And so the second time around, she's more powerful than she was before. And so you have the maiden, the Virgin, and then you have the mother. And then the crone is the next form. And so you have three different mercuries. You have the Virgin, which is the fire, the element of fire, or the primitive mercury. And then you have the water, and that's called the caduceus. It has two snakes on the staff, whereas the primitive mercury only has one snake on the staff. And then the element of air is the third mercury, or they call it the second mercury, but it's the third one. In Egyptian terminology, Wadjet becomes the Black Mother, and then the Black Mother gives birth to the Virgin, and then the Black Mother becomes the crone. And so Basil Valentine likened that to the Black Mother being wine, the crone is vinegar, because you added the element of air through sublimation into the wine. And so the wine becomes oxidized. Now, literally, in if you weren't speaking figuratively, if you're talking about wine, oxidizing wine creates vinegar. And so even though the substance they're referring to, they call it wine, it isn't wine. But when it's oxidized, they now call it vinegar because it's a similar process, even though it's a different substance. Then, apart from all those mercuries, you have the principle of mercury. There are two primary principles which are required to accomplish the great work. And in saying that, you have to also understand the difference between the great work and the mirror of the work. In the great work, you're only operating on two primary mineral principles. Those principles, which are purely mineral, there's no metal involved, are the two serpents that become wrapped around the caduceus. And they're also the roots out of which the philosopher's stone is born. And so these two primary principles, they call sulfur and mercury. And one is male, the sulfur is male, and the mercury is female. And when they say mercury, they're not talking about a metal. This is a purely mineral substance. Fulcanelli describes, he said, it's called the book because it comes in layers like a book. Or it's called the black scaly dragon. And this mineral principle is called mercury. And so then you have the subject you're operating on is the principle of mercury. And then you use the three different mercuries to operate on that. And so when they're talking to you about it, you know, they take the mercury and add it to the mercury, and you get more mercury. And so it becomes rather confusing. But if you think of it in the term of essences of the elements, the primary mercury is the essence of fire. Quite literally, it's the liquid form of fire. And then what they call the first mercury, the caduceus with both serpents, this is the essence of water. And then the second mercury is the essence of air. And so these three essences are three of the four basic principles required for anything that has physical form to be born. And it's just a matter of what the ratio of those things in that substance is and what order the layers are in. So 9 times out of 10, there are times where they're actually talking about the metal mercury, but 9 times out of 10, they are not talking about the metal mercury. If it's the great work, then they are never talking about the metal mercury, because in the great work, only minerals are used. There is no metal of any kind in the great work. The mirror of the work is when you're working on metals, and they call it the mirror because your main 3 principles that you operate with are the same, but they're subjective different. But the pattern of operation is also the same. And so it becomes really easy to confuse the two together, because you could be describing one when you're actually describing the other. It sounds like they're describing one. And so learning how to distinguish between when they're talking about the mirror of the work, as in operations on metals, physical metals, and then when they're talking about the great work, which is operating on the 2 principles of alchemy. The untangling of the mercury comes much simpler when you begin to understand that when you hear the word Mercury, you shouldn't have the metal in your mind. You should have the word essence in your mind. And so you're dealing with the essence of things. There's two different sides to the work. You have Mercury, the way or the work of Mercury, which properly translated is the way or the work of essences. And then you have alchemy of the self, where you're applying the principles of alchemy to your mind and body and soul, and you're learning to understand, because we're made out of atoms, and the process in which atoms were born are also the same processes in which our whole being operates in, the same cycles. And so it's much more difficult to understand what they're saying if you're not in the laboratory doing physical work. Trying to learn it all before you get into the laboratory is not very likely to work, because the true understanding comes when you see these things happen in front of your face. Because our brains just have not encountered cold fusion before. And so when it happens, it doesn't happen like anything you've ever understood before. The atom quite literally separates into its parts, or depending on which catalyst you're using, it'll congeal them all together. And if you have I did it with 4 ounces of silver, and if you congeal the silver together, you get one giant atom of silver. And then you grow that one atom, and then you put it through mitosis, and it becomes silver atoms again, in the same exact fashion as a chicken egg, being one single cell of the chicken, divides and multiplies and becomes all the cells required to make a chicken. Well, the single cell, the single atom of metal goes through the same thing. When they say you have to bring it back to its first state, that's quite literally what they're talking about. The metal has to be brought back into a form of a single atom. And just exactly the same way a chicken egg is divided and multiplied through mitosis, the metal again must go through mitosis and become reatomized. And in doing so, it multiplies itself, because you added the ingredients required in the process of congealing and coagulating it. The other thing I wanted to talk about a little bit was, although I try not to really talk about myself a whole lot here, I'm trying to share about alchemy, but I thought maybe sharing a little bit about how I came into this may help somebody else find their way, if that's what they really wanted. And for me, it was never a goal of mine to be an alchemist. I never thought I would be an alchemist. I wasn't pursuing it, although I was always curious about it. There was always that curiosity there for it. And my friend gave me a book called The Mystery of the Cathedrals by Fulcanelli. And her name happened to be Isis. And she told me, she said, you need to read this book. I think you'd probably understand what they're talking about. And Mystery of the Cathedrals, I looked at the, and I was raised by a preacher and spent most of my life in church. And so reading a book about churches was not highest on my priority list. And so for the next 2 years, she bugged me every couple of months. Have you read that book yet? No, I haven't read the book. And finally, I read the book just so that if she asked me again, I could say, yes, I read the book. And when I read it, I was digging in a gold mine and about 60 feet deep in a tunnel, listening to the audiobook on my headphones while I was jackhammering. And I realized what they were talking about, and being a gold miner and involved in understanding of metals and things, I could sense an understanding already coming together in some parts. And I thought, well, I wonder how long it would take to understand all of the hieroglyphs if I'm already beginning to understand one of them or some of them right away. And so, not realizing I was going deep into the rabbit hole, I decided I would try it and see what would happen. And I listened to Fulcanelli, Dwellings of the Philosophers, for several years. It wasn't until I had listened to the book maybe over 300 times, I lost track, around 300 times, maybe 350 times, and I began to start to understand. And that sent me into my workshop, and I set up a laboratory, and I started experimenting on what I thought it was, and it took 3 years before I had the first substance in my hand. And I'm 3 years of all day and all night working in the laboratory. And it took another 2 years before I understood how to even use that first one product, primitive mercury. And but then once the understanding started to unfold and I started to apply it to things to understand its behavior, its nature, and then the other principles began to reveal themselves. And I found myself in a universe where the elements are completely fluid. They're interchangeable. The parts can be taken apart, intermixed and mingled and put back together. The fascinating thing is nobody believes you when you talk about it. I mean, they really don't. I mean, and modern science has done such a good job telling everybody that alchemy is bullshit that people just kind of shrug and nod and act like I told them that the earth is flat. And so it's been a fascinating experience where I've been accused of being insane, gone crazy, I lost my mind, all these things. But everything that I'm doing is based off physical experience, physical experiments, and like tangible results in your hand, proving that what the alchemists said, every word they're saying is actually true, contrary to what you'll hear if you ask AI if alchemy ever worked. And even the alchemists of today, the ones that practice the Carl Jung alchemy and the mental, and I'm not dissing that at all. I think that's a vital aspect to alchemy. But the majority of those people also, because they believe what they've been told, believe that the metallurgical side of alchemy is a fairy tale, and that the alchemists never succeeded. And it turns out that they actually did succeed. I have a long way to go. I'm just at the beginning of my journey, and it's taken over 5 years now just to get through the tasks of Hercules, which is to prepare my ingredients. But in the process of all that, the understanding of nature itself has begun to unfold. And through the eyes of modern science, or their terminology of modern science, everything that happens in an alchemist's laboratory is accomplished by cold fusion. There's simply no other way to do it, because it's only through this process that you can take the elements apart without damaging the pieces. And the problem is that modern science does not have any tools that can accomplish this. And so, think of it like a mechanic. Somebody brings their car into the mechanic, and there's 2 mechanics there, and one of them takes a picture of it before he takes anything apart. He takes the bolts off one at a time. He removes the carburetor, and he carefully keeps track of each piece. And then the other guy, he takes a sledgehammer and smashes the carburetor and shows you the inside and says, yeah, here's the part that was broken. But he says it's impossible for you to ever put this carburetor back together, and anybody that tells you otherwise is full of shit. And he's right, because when he took it apart, he destroyed it. It's not ever going to go back together. Whereas the other guy, he did it carefully and he used the right tools. Modern science does not have the right tools to take an element apart without destroying the pieces. And that is the difference between alchemy and modern science. Cold fusion allows one to separate the parts individually. Different catalysts will produce different products, will separate different aspects out of the element. And it's done in a controlled, calm reaction, which could actually, most of the time, even be turned off at any point if you wanted to stop. Not that you ever should, because stopping mid-reaction changes the result. But I'm saying that it's controllable. It's not an out-of-control reaction like it's happening in the particle accelerators, where they bombard the element. And then you're not like in the particle accelerator, because the reaction is out of control, they can only operate on a couple of atoms at a time, because otherwise they'll blow themselves up. But with cold fusion, now you can operate on a kilo at a time of the material, or depending on how big your vessel is, and do it in a controlled manner and separate each of the parts in such a way that if you so desired, you could put them back together and the product would actually be better than it was before. If you're serious about getting into alchemy, I would recommend taking an alchemy class. The only one I'm familiar with currently is this girl Twitchy Witch, and she's on YouTube, and she's on most of the social media, Instagram and all those. Although she doesn't believe in the metallurgical side of things, because that's what she was taught, she is extremely well informed on alchemy. And if you want to get a broad roots understanding of alchemy itself, it would be exponentially beneficial for you. I wish I could have started with that myself. And if I had the means, I would probably even take her class now because it would help my understanding even further. But what I did was don't read too many different authors because they don't all have the same, they didn't all figure it all out. And so I stick with Fulcanelli and Basil Valentine and The Secret Work of Hermetic Philosophy by an unknown author. And then like literally read the book, listen to the book, read the book, listen to the book. If you don't do that hundreds of times, then you probably don't really want it that bad. You have to, they don't give you the information in order, and so once your understanding comes in one part, then you listen to it again and you'll understand another part better because of the understanding of that first part. It all unfolds on itself. You have to put the time in to learn the language of the birds. Fulcanelli, as far as I'm concerned, in my opinion, because this is how it worked for me, he is the primer for understanding the language of the birds. He does a really good job. And then if you couple that with Basil Valentine, The Secret Work of Hermetic Philosophy, and I really like the Trina Sophia, but it's fully allegorical. So, but he's really good at telling you the colors and the days and the order of operations in a very descriptive manner. But you have to want it so bad that you're willing to listen to audiobooks or read books on alchemy pretty much all day, every day, until it starts to click, basically. And if you're also taking classes from somebody like Twitchy Witch, then you'll be gaining a broader overview of the whole thing and how to apply it to yourself. If you learn to apply it first to yourself, that will help your understanding. It'll allow your mind to receive fresh new information, because the things that you're going to be learning are contrary to everything you've been taught by modern science. In the same way that if you dissolve silver and it turns into one single atom, if you dissolve a bird, you can turn it back into an egg, and then you can hatch the egg, and the bird is better than it was before, because the laws of nature are the same across the board. Nature uses single cells and mitosis to multiply things, whatever the thing may be, whether it's animal, vegetable, or mineral. And if you dive into it head first without holding back, you're much more likely to succeed, but you're also going to be told that you're crazy. Everybody's going to say, look, nobody ever succeeded, and that's not true. That's not true at all. And that is if you believe that it's impossible, then you'll never accomplish it, because why would you try something that is impossible? Well, if you understand that it really is possible, and not only is it possible, but this is how all things that exist come into being, then there is no pursuit higher than an understanding of all life and all creation on earth, because it leads to an understanding of yourself and an understanding of how you came into existence. And your intricate intertwinement with all of life and earth. We are just as part of the earth and just as vital to the earth as every other aspect of it, and we are capable of being a caretaker or a parasite. So, good luck, my friends, and have a blessed journey through the labyrinth.